Dog goes to say goodbye to its police owner, but notices something strange and stops the doctor. Max couldn't explain the strange sensation enveloping his entire body. The Belgian Malinois police dog stood still before the glass door of the ICU, his sharp eyes tracking every movement of Dr. Morrison. It was late at night, but the glaring fluorescent lights in the hospital couldn't dispel the heavy atmosphere. He caught a familiar scent, chemicals, pungent and odd, making his heart pound faster. This wasn't a smell a typical doctor would carry, and it made the dog sense something was wrong. Sarah wasn't just Max's close teammate, but also the key witness in the drug smuggling case they had busted a few months earlier. She held critical information about the criminal organization, which was why they were determined to eliminate her. Before we continue, please like and subscribe if you love emotional and dramatic stories. Though Sarah lay motionless on the hospital bed, her frail body surrounded by life-sustaining medical equipment, Max couldn't shake the unease gnawing at his heart. Sarah, the companion he had always protected, was in grave danger. That was why Max couldn't take his eyes off Dr. Morrison. Suspicion wasn't something Max typically felt, but today was different. He couldn't look away from Morrison. The dog noticed the doctor holding a strange syringe, unlike the usual ones used in the hospital. A pungent chemical odor emanated from it, reminiscent of the smell Max had encountered during the drug smuggling case months ago. Morrison edged closer to Sarah's IV line, his hand trembling slightly as he prepared to inject a strange green liquid into it. Max's instincts couldn't be wrong, and this wasn't the first time he'd sensed something amiss while standing by Sarah's side.
"Easy, Max,"
Officer Mike Rodriguez, Max's handler, whispered as he gently tugged the leash, trying to calm the dog. But Max paid no attention to the words. His ears remained upright, his piercing eyes fixed on Dr. Morrison. Max was all too familiar with detecting signs of danger from his years working alongside Sarah. And now, he sensed the threat lurking behind this doctor. Since the incident at the airport, where Max had helped Sarah uncover and thwart a drug smuggling ring, no one understood his instincts better than he did. That chemical smell. He had encountered it before. It carried a dangerous word that couldn't be described. Max suspected Dr. Morrison might be tied to some kind of conspiracy, though he couldn't be certain. The dog focused all his attention on every move the doctor made. Each time Morrison drew closer to Sarah's bed, Max's heartbeat quickened. The tension in the air seemed to intensify with every passing minute. After noticing Max's anxiety, Mike bent down close and patted him gently.
I know, Max. We're all worried about her. But Sarah's being well cared for. You have to trust me."
But Mike's comforting words couldn't ease the warning signs stirring in Max's heart. He knew that if his instincts were right, it wasn't just Sarah who was in danger. The entire hospital was a target of a larger conspiracy, and Max could sense the threat, even though everyone around him seemed oblivious. He couldn't let this pass without taking action. Max tried to restrain himself, but the unease kept him from standing still. Dr. Morrison remained there, silently adjusting the medical equipment, seemingly unaware of the piercing gaze Max fixed on him. Max couldn't take his eyes off Morrison, his intuition screaming that any delay could cost Sarah dearly for their lack of vigilance. The strange chemical scent still haunted his senses, a clear signal warning of something sinister. Despite Mike's gentle tug on the leash and soft reassurances, all Max could feel was a potent, undeniable danger lurking beneath the surface. Sarah lay motionless on the bed, her critical condition sustained by medical devices, with Morrison appearing to be her sole caretaker. But Max knew all too well that not every doctor had good intentions in situations like this. Morrison's calm and confident demeanor as he manipulated the machinery around Sarah only deepened Max's suspicions. From the way he handled the syringe to the meticulous adjustments he made to the medication flowing into her, every move was composed, yet carried an unsettling air, as if he were executing a scheme rather than providing care. Max felt the tension in the air growing thicker by the moment. Each time Dr. Morrison entered the room, even for a fleeting second, Sarah visibly weakened. Her vital signs steadily declined, the machines emitting frantic beeps of alarm, yet no one seemed to notice. Honed by years of experience, Max's sharp senses picked up even the slightest shifts around him. This wasn't merely vague anxiety, it was an unmistakable signal of danger. He knew something terrible was about to unfold and was unable to hold back any longer. He lunged forward.
Max, calm down.
Mike said softly, trying to soothe the dog, but his voice couldn't quell the rising unease surging within Max's heart. The dog's gaze remained fixed on Morrison, unwavering for even a second. Max's instincts had never been wrong in the past, and this time was no exception. The tension in his body grew so intense it became uncontrollable. A sharp, rumbling growl escaped from Max, echoing through the hallway, startling Mike.
The monitor,
Mike whispered, his eyes darting to the screen beside the bed. Just as Max had sensed, Sarah's vital signs plummeted abruptly, not due to her natural condition, but because of some unnatural interference. Mike frowned, registering something ominous, yet he remained a step behind Max's keen perception. No longer waiting, Max lunged toward the door with powerful strides, dragging Mike along behind him. Mike couldn't hold the dog back as Max's patience ran out. The truth had been clear to Max for some time, and now it shone brighter than ever. Morrison was doing something sinister to Sarah. He couldn't stand idly by while she was in danger. Max raced to the ICU door, his eyes blazing and his body taut as a bowstring. He was determined not to let Sarah remain at risk while Morrison was still there. As the door swung open, Max charged in, causing Morrison to spin around in surprise. The dog stood towering in the middle of the room, steadfast and unmoving, like an impenetrable barrier. Mike hurried in right behind him, catching only a glimpse of a suspicious scene. Morrison showed no signs of panic, but when his eyes met Max's, a flicker of unease crossed his face. The unwavering resolve and awareness of danger in Max's stare made him freeze momentarily before he abruptly turned and bolted toward the back door.
Stop!
Mike shouted, but Dr. Morrison had already dashed out of the room. Max didn't let him escape, charging after him instantly, his paws pounding hard against the glossy tiled floor. Max bolted down the hospital corridor, each step steady and firm, his eyes blazing with determination. Mike followed close behind, struggling to keep pace, but unable to deny the tension that enveloped the air.
Max, stop!
He shouted, but Max paid no heed to the call. For him, there was only one target: Dr. Morrison. As they neared the back door of the ICU area, Max abruptly halted, standing still, his nose sniffing rapidly. He detected a chemical scent in the air, no longer vague as before, but sharp and unmistakable. It was an undeniable sign of danger. Max understood that Morrison wasn't just an accomplice. He was a key link in the underground organization that he and Sarah had unwittingly exposed. Mike stepped up beside Max, puzzled by the dog's sudden pause, but sensing something ominous.
What do you see, Max?
He asked, his voice laced with worry, his eyes fixed on his companion. Max didn't reply, only silently turned to look at Mike, his gaze resolute, as if confirming something, then shifted toward the door where Morrison had just disappeared. His eyes locked onto it, a place that seemed to conceal a secret no one else knew. When Max pushed the door open and stepped inside, both of them faced a scene that left them stunned. Morrison wasn't alone. He was conversing with a man in medical protective gear, his demeanor suggesting he was carrying out an important task. Clearly, what was happening in this room was far from ordinary medical work.
Unbelievable,
Mike whispered, his gaze settling on the neatly arranged chemical bottles on the table and the fingerprints still visible on the medical equipment. A strange smell assaulted his senses, permeating the room, not the familiar scent of hospital medicine, but a pungent chemical odor, exuding an unprecedented sense of danger. Max didn't hesitate. He charged into the room, dragging Mike along with an unstoppable force. The scene before them heightened their sense of urgency. Morrison turned around, his cold, empty eyes meeting theirs. He showed no trace of surprise or fear. Instead, his calm demeanor was almost unnatural, as if he had anticipated this moment. A smirk briefly flickered across his face, but vanished as Max advanced toward him.
"Stop, Morrison!"
Mike roared, his hand swiftly drawing the gun from his holster. But Morrison remained unfazed. He gave a slight smile and stepped back, as though everything was unfolding according to his plan.
"We know about your organization,"
Mike said, struggling to keep his voice steady.
"You won't get away with this."
Morrison stayed silent, but when his gaze met Max's, a fleeting glimmer of fear passed through his eyes. His confidence seemed to waver. Max sensed it instantly. Acting on instinct, he yanked the leash free from Mike's grip and lunged straight at Morrison. It all happened in a flash. Morrison scrambled to retreat, but he couldn't escape in time. Max pounced, his jaws clamping tightly onto Morrison's arm, pinning him to the floor without mercy. Morrison's scream echoed through the room. Mike rushed forward, subduing him completely. As Morrison collapsed, a wallet slipped from his pocket, revealing a business card inside. Mike bent down to pick it up, muttering,
"James Wilson. This isn't his real name."
Max kept Morrison pinned beneath his paws, preventing any movement. The vague suspicions that had stirred in his mind from the start now solidified into certainty. This conspiracy stretched far beyond anything they had ever imagined. The relentless beeping from the machines in the ICU rang out heavily, like an unceasing warning that Sarah was facing a peril far beyond anyone's imagination. Max still held James Wilson, the doctor imposter, pinned beneath his paws, allowing no movement. Not a word was spoken, only the steady ticking of the digital clock counting down, blending with Max's low, rumbling growl. The room was steeped in a thick, suffocating tension. Mike bent down to pick up the USB that had slipped from Wilson's pocket and plugged it into the computer. The screen instantly displayed a list of the organization's members, along with their detailed plans.
"He wasn't acting alone,"
Mike whispered to Max, his gaze shifting to the wallet Wilson had just dropped. Inside, a business card revealed the name James Wilson. Not Morrison, as they had assumed, but someone else entirely. The card was devoid of any additional information, bearing only a solitary name, with no trace of authenticity. Mike let out a sigh, realizing this was merely the surface of a much deeper conspiracy. He couldn't help but marvel at Max's keen instincts. From the very beginning, the dog had sensed something off, and now Max was the key to unraveling this dark network.
"Thank you, Max,"
Mike said softly, his hand giving the dog a gentle pat on the back. But Max didn't budge, keeping Wilson immobilized with unwavering resolve. Turning back to Sarah, a wave of unease surged through Mike's heart. She still lay motionless on the bed, the medical devices steadily monitoring her every breath, yet the atmosphere in the room had shifted. It wasn't because Sarah's condition had worsened, but because a greater threat loomed. Not just from this imposter, but from a dangerous organization with a reach and menace more terrifying than anything they had ever encountered. Max stood motionless, his piercing gaze locked onto Wilson, showing not the slightest intention of easing up.
"He's hiding something,"
Mike muttered, growing more convinced of his gut feeling with each passing thought. The neatly arranged chemical bottles on the table, the medical equipment bearing unexplained traces of tampering, all of it pointed to a single truth. They weren't just dealing with a lone criminal, but a sophisticated conspiracy that went far beyond ordinary crimes like drug smuggling or arms dealing. Wilson squirmed, desperately trying to break free from Max, but it was futile. Max tightened his jaws, holding him still beneath his paws as if determined not to let this man escape.
He's not getting away.
Mike whispered, looking into Max's resolute eyes.
We need to figure out what he was planning here.
A few medical staff burst into the room, frozen in shock at the sight before them. Mike immediately stepped forward, barking sharply.
Call the police now. No one comes near until everything's clear.
In that moment, Max continued to pin Wilson down, as if he understood that protecting Sarah was the top priority. Mike realized this fight had grown far beyond simply safeguarding her. It was a battle to thwart a criminal scheme these people were desperate to conceal. The police arrived swiftly, dragging Wilson away, but Max didn't relent, ensuring he had no chance to slip through the net. This imposter doctor might have once operated within the hospital, but now everything was laid bare. Once again, Max had come to the rescue. Mike turned to look at Sarah, a glimmer of hope flickering in his chest. Though she remained weak, the truth had begun to surface. Yet a looming question haunted him. How powerful was this organization? And could they stop those behind it before it all spiraled out of control? Max was an irreplaceable companion who stood by Sarah's side, steadfastly guarding her, defending justice, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the police escorted Wilson out, Max remained rooted in place, his piercing gaze fixed on the fake doctor, as if trying to unearth the reason behind his actions. Though the man was subdued, Max still sensed a lurking danger in the air, not out of anger, but from the sharp instincts that had never failed him. Mike stepped forward, gently patting the dog's back.
Thank you, Max.
But his eyes quickly swept the room, lingering on the neatly arranged chemical bottles, the faint fingerprints on the medical equipment, and the disturbed medicine cabinet.
What's going on here?
He wondered aloud, his heart sinking under the weight of a hunch that this was a conspiracy far beyond anything they'd imagined. Sarah lay there, motionless on the bed, the steady hum of the machines a constant reminder that she was still in peril. A police chief approached, handing Mike a business card from Wilson's pocket.
James Wilson,
Mike muttered, frowning as he recognized the false identity. At that moment, another officer burst in, breathless.
Mike, someone's trying to break into the hospital. It might be connected to this organization.
Mike felt his blood run cold, though he wasn't surprised. This calm was only temporary. Max's ears shot up, his gaze shifting to the door, a low growl rumbling from his throat like a call to action. Mike nodded to the officer.
Get ready now. We have to deal with this immediately.
He turned to Sarah, his heart tightening at her fragile form. She was the key to unveiling the truth. But time wasn't on their side. The documents from Wilson's office flashed in his mind, lines of text revealing a global network, intricately coordinated from hospitals to international organizations.
This isn't just a crime ring.
Mike said, his voice low, his hand clenching the file tightly.
They're pulling strings from the shadows.
Max moved toward the door, his eyes alight with resolve, as if insisting they couldn't falter. Mike knew that with Max, his irreplaceable partner, they had to dig deeper, confront the unseen enemies, protect Sarah, and stop a conspiracy from spreading beyond their control. The hospital room door slammed shut behind Mike and Max as the officer rushed off to assemble the team to deal with the intruders. Mike paused, closing his eyes to steady himself, but his gaze remained fixed on Sarah. Though she was still unconscious, he felt an invisible strength emanating from her, urging him not only to save her, but also to thwart the conspiracy threatening the entire hospital, and perhaps the whole city. Max stood beside him, silent yet alert, ears pricked, eyes gleaming with resolute determination. Mike knew the enemy wouldn't stop at a single attack. They had tracked down the hospital, pinpointed Sarah's exact location, and were certainly not going to give up easily.
You see it too, don't you, Max?
he whispered, but he didn't need an answer. Max's look said it all. This wasn't just an ordinary skirmish. It was a battle against an underground force capable of manipulating everything, from healthcare to security. Max let out a low growl, as if in agreement, then moved toward the door with unwavering certainty. Mike hurried after him, stepping out of the room. The hallway buzzed with uniformed officers, primed for the inevitable confrontation. He approached the team leader, his voice cold yet firm. "This isn't just about protecting the hospital. We have to stop them before they strike. This organization isn't limited to one person. They're plotting something far more dangerous." The team leader nodded, immediately issuing orders to secure all exits. But Mike didn't stop there. Alongside Max, he pressed on to uncover clues about the mastermind. Max took the lead, his steps forceful, every sense sharper than ever. Though the faint scent of chemicals lingered in the air, the immediate threat now came from the unseen lurkers. At the entrance to the inspection area, Mike commanded,
"Guard every exit. No one leaves until we catch them."
The team leader sprang into action, but Max paused, his gaze locked on a small window at the end of the corridor. Mike sensed the shift. A cold draft swept in as a dark shadow flashed by, swift as the wind.
"You've spotted it, haven't you?"
Mike asked, his breath tense. Max growled, eyes never leaving the window.
"Be on guard,"
Mike shouted, and the police team snapped into position. Max charged forward without hesitation, as if driven by instinct. Mike ran after him, heart pounding, knowing this enemy was anything but simple. The dim hallway lights cast ghostly shadows across the window. Mike raced to keep up with Max.
"You know something, don't you?"
He didn't need a reply. Max's blazing eyes spoke volumes. The team leader barked orders.
"Check every exit. Don't let anyone slip through."
Max led the way, each step steady, primed to face any threat. A sudden noise shattered the silence. Max surged ahead, pulling the team into a chase down the corridor. Mike's pulse raced, aware that this foe was no ordinary one. They could shift plans in an instant. The sound of urgent footsteps echoed, guiding them to the security room. Inside the empty room, the surveillance screens glowed, but several cameras were disabled. Mike whispered to Max.
"They've hacked the system."
Max stood still, his focus riveted on a small monitor. A stranger's image appeared, moving stealthily through the hospital.
"Who is he?"
Mike muttered, a chill running through him as he realized they were a step behind. Max's ears perked up, catching the sound of footsteps from the hallway's end. He bolted out, paws slamming against the floor, leading Mike and the police to a shadowed corner. A man in protective gear turned, eyes wide with panic. He hurled something, and smoke billowed up, but Max cut through the haze, tackling him. The man collapsed, snarling,
"You can't win. Bigger things are coming."
Mike yanked him up, hand gripping his gun, though he didn't need to fire. The man was already pinned by Max, his defiant glare mixed with fear.
"This is just the beginning."
He rasped. Mike locked eyes with Max, resolve igniting within him.
"We'll track them down, every last one."
Back in the hallway, Mike peered through the window, the faint fluorescent glow failing to dispel his lingering unease. Mike gripped the file tightly in his hand, his voice low as he spoke to Max.
"We've got a lead, haven't we? The industrial zone in the east? That's where they're operating."
But before he could piece together their next move, a sudden sound erupted from the ICU, rapid, urgent beeping louder than ever, mixed with the shrill whine of the ventilator. Mike spun around, his heart pounding. He raced back to the room, Max hot on his heels. When the door flung open, the sight before him froze him in place. Sarah lay motionless on the bed, her face pale as wax, her lips slowly turning blue. The vital signs on the monitor were plummeting out of control, her heart rate sluggish, blood pressure crashing, oxygen levels dropping to critical. The machines screeched incessantly, red lights flashing like a desperate cry for help. A faint chemical scent wafted through the air, its source unclear, but stirring memories of what Max had once detected from Morrison.
Sarah!
Mike shouted, his voice breaking in panic. He rushed to her bedside, grasping her hand, now icy and trembling in his own.
Don't give up, Sarah, please. You're everything we have. You have to stay strong. You have to live.
He turned to Max, almost pleading.
Max, do something. We can't lose her.
Max stood still for a split second, his blazing eyes fixed on Sarah, then abruptly spun around and bolted out of the room at a speed Mike had never seen. The dog tore down the hallway, his barks echoing, fierce and resolute, a call for help that couldn't be ignored. Officers froze in surprise, but Max didn't stop. He knew exactly what he had to do. Reaching the nurse's station, he skidded to a halt before a nurse checking charts, barking relentlessly, his front paws scraping the floor with force, his eyes brimming with urgency. The nurse flinched, but, catching Max's gaze, understood instantly.
ICU, right?
She asked quickly, then ran after him, radioing her colleagues.
Code emergency, ICU, now!
Mike stayed by Sarah's side, clutching her hand tightly. His voice was choked with emotion.
Can you hear me, Sarah? Max is getting help. You have to hold on for us, for everything you fought for.
He leaned down, whispering in her ear,
You're the strongest person I've ever known. Don't leave us now.
Tears fell from his eyes, mingling with the cold skin of her hand. Max led the nurse team charging back into the room, their footsteps thundering. A doctor and two nurses burst in, immediately tending to the machines and pushing Mike aside.
Blood pressure's too low. Oxygen's critical. Prep the epinephrine.
The doctor ordered, his voice urgent. Max stood close to the bed, eyes never leaving Sarah, a soft growl rumbling in his throat as if urging her to fight on. He edged nearer, his nose gently brushing her hand, a silent promise that he wouldn't abandon her. The medical team worked tirelessly in the ICU, the glaring white lights illuminating tense faces. The hum of machines mingled with the doctor's urgent commands.
Increase the dose, hurry, we're losing her.
Mike stood outside the glass door, his hands gripping the frame tightly, his eyes never leaving Sarah for even a moment. Max sat beside him, body still but ears perked as if awaiting a sign of hope. Time dragged on endlessly, each tick of the clock matched by a heavy thud of Mike's heartbeat. After more than 3 hours of struggle, the lead doctor emerged, removing his mask, sweat rolling down his forehead.
We've stabilized her.
He said, his voice weary yet relieved.
The toxin in her system is under control. Likely from some strange drug administered earlier. She's past the critical stage, but we'll need to keep monitoring her.
Mike nodded, speechless, his hand giving Max's head a light pat in silent gratitude. Max let out a soft growl, his eyes shining with trust. The night passed in silence, broken only by the steady beeping of the machines, a melody of hope. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the hospital window, Mike and Max remained there, never straying from Sarah's side. Suddenly, Sarah's hand twitched, her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Mike rushed forward, grasping her hand.
Sarah, you're awake. Thank God.
His voice choked with emotion, tears streaming down his cheeks. Sarah looked around, her gaze tired but growing brighter. She managed a faint smile when she saw Max, who immediately stepped closer, his nose gently nudging her hand, tail wagging slightly in a warm greeting.
Max,
She whispered, her voice weak but filled with warmth.
thank you, and Mike, for not giving up on me.
Mike sat beside her, his tone gentle.
We'd never give up on you, Sarah. You're our hero, and now you're back.
He turned to Max, smiling.
He ran all over the hospital to save you. Without Max, we couldn't have done it.
Sarah reached out with a frail hand to stroke Max's head. The dog lowered it, his once fierce eyes now softening as if sensing she was safe. The doctor entered, performing a final check and confirming Sarah had passed the danger and would gradually recover. Mike let out a breath, relief washing over him after days of strain. He looked at Sarah and Max, his heart swelling with hope. They had won a major battle, not just against the organization, but against the thin line between life and death. The next day, Sarah was moved to the recovery ward, where sunlight streamed through the window and illuminated her face, which was now tinged with a healthier flush. Mike sat beside her, recounting everything, from how Max uncovered Morrison and captured Wilson to the chase after the stranger and the desperate moment when she nearly slipped away. Sarah listened, her eyes lighting up as she looked at Max, the dog lying quietly by the bed like a silent guardian.
We're not done yet.
Mike said, his voice low but firm.
The industrial zone in the east, that's where they're operating. But now that you're awake, we can expose them completely.
Sarah nodded, squeezing Mike's hand tightly.
I remember a name. Victor Kane. He's the one behind it all. I'll tell you everything.
Max lifted his head, letting out a soft growl as if in agreement. Mike smiled.
Thank you, Sarah. And Max, you're our brightest star.
He stood up, his eyes blazing with determination.
We'll see this through, together.
The hospital gradually returned to a peaceful calm. But Mike, Max, and Sarah knew the greatest battle still lay ahead. With Sarah recovering, they gained the strength to confront the organization. The sunlight pouring through the window felt like a promise of a new day, a day when justice would prevail, thanks to the unbreakable bond between a police dog, a devoted officer, and a hero who had survived the brink of death. Sarah sat up in her hospital bed, her eyes growing brighter despite her still weak body. Mike stood beside her, holding the file from Wilson, listening intently to every word she spoke.
Victor Kane.
Sarah whispered, her voice resolute.
He's the one behind everything. I remember him from a meeting at the Eastern Industrial Zone. He talked about a judgment day, a grand plan. But we can't risk a raid without knowing he's there. If we tip him off, he'll vanish for good.
Mike nodded, his gaze sharp.
You're right. We need to lure him out. Confirm he's at the industrial zone before the police move in.
Max lay beside the bed, ears perked as if in agreement. Sarah gave a faint smile.
I know how to reach him. During the smuggling case, I overheard a radio code. Frequency 107.9. If we pose as buyers for a large batch of chemicals, he'll take the bait.
They spent the entire day piecing together information from the USB and Sarah's memories. Victor Kane was the orchestrator of a toxic chemical network, hiding behind the facade of a businessman. Mike turned on the radio, tuning it to frequency 107.9, his voice low.
This is Dark Knight, requesting a meeting with the boss to discuss a big deal. 2 tons of special goods.
A crackling voice responded after a few seconds of silence.
If you want the real stuff, you'll have to meet in person. To avoid scams, right?
Mike glanced at Sarah and she nodded.
Exactly,
he replied.
We'll come to see the goods ourselves.
After several tense exchanges, the voice agreed.
Tomorrow, 10 p.m., Gate 3 at the Eastern Industrial Zone. Don't try anything stupid.
Mike switched off the radio, looking at Max.
We've got our chance, but we need to be careful. Max, you'll stay with the task force. We'll carry the trackers.
The following night, Mike and Sarah stood before Gate 3 of the industrial zone, a cold wind whistling through the dilapidated warehouses. Both had swallowed advanced tracking devices, tiny GPS-emitting capsules, before arriving, aware that things could spiral out of control. Sarah wore a thick coat to conceal her frail condition, while Mike donned sunglasses, posing as a seasoned dealer. Max remained with the task force 2 miles away, the team poised to strike once the GPS signal came through. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, guns in hand.
Blindfold them,
one ordered. Mike and Sarah were blindfolded with black cloth, and their hidden weapons were thoroughly searched and removed.
If you want to meet the boss, you play by the rules.
The leader sneered, pushing them into a vehicle. After a winding journey, the car stopped, and they were led through damp, musty corridors, the distant roar of machinery rumbling in the background. When the blindfolds were removed, Mike and Sarah found themselves in a sealed room, dim red light casting shadows over stacks of chemical barrels. Victor Kane, tall with white hair and icy eyes, sat in a leather chair, a cigar in hand.
"You want 2 tons of special goods?"
he asked, his deep voice dripping with suspicion.
"What for?"
Mike responded quickly, his tone confident.
We need it for a project at the port. Industrial waste disposal. 2 tons is a test batch. If it's good, we'll order 10 more.
Sarah chimed in, her voice calm.
We came here to see the real stuff. No middlemen. Money's not an issue, but we don't like being conned.
Kane smirked, rising and stepping closer, staring intently at Mike.
"You seem professional, but why haven't I heard of Dark Knight before?"
Mike gave a wry chuckle.
We work discreetly. Only fools brag in this business.
Kane nodded, leading them to a chemical barrel and popping the lid.
"This is the best. Enough to turn a whole city to ash. Want to test it?"
Sarah nodded, pretending to inspect it.
It looks solid. We'll wire the money as soon as we're back.
Kane laughed loudly, but his eyes were razor sharp.
"Good. But first I need to be sure."
He turned to his men and said,
"Recheck them."
The tension was palpable as the henchmen searched more thoroughly. Mike kept his cool, though his heart pounded at the thought of the tracker in his stomach. Fortunately, the device went undetected. Kane nodded.
"It seems you're legit. Go and don't forget the cash."
But as Sarah turned to leave, Kane froze, his voice dropping.
"Wait, I know you, Sarah, the rat from the airport deal."
Sarah paled, but Mike reacted swiftly, laughing loudly.
"You've got the wrong person, buddy. She's my assistant."
Kane gritted his teeth, gesturing to his men.
"Tie them up. I don't take chances."
In an instant, Mike and Sarah were dragged to 2 iron chairs, their hands and feet bound tightly with rope. Kane approached, pulling out a small knife, its blade glinting under the red light.
"You think I wouldn't remember the face that ruined my $1 million shipment?"
He snarled, pressing the knife against Sarah's throat. Sarah's breaths came in short gasps, but her voice stayed firm.
You've got the wrong person. I'm just a buyer.
Kane sneered, slamming his fist into Mike's face, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth.
"No more pretending. I'll rip the truth out of you before I kill you."
He turned to Sarah, slicing a shallow cut across her arm with his knife, blood dripping onto the floor. Sarah clenched her teeth, refusing to scream, her eyes blazing.
You won't win, Kane.
Mike thrashed against his restraints, the ropes cutting into his wrists until they bled.
"Let her go, you bastard! Take it out on me!"
Kane laughed loudly, delivering a hard kick to Mike's chest that sent him toppling backward in his chair.
"You think I'm stupid? I know the cops are lurking out there, but the chemical bomb will go off before they get here, and you'll both die in this room."
He pressed a button on the wall, and a countdown screen flickered to life. 15 minutes. 2 miles away, the task force monitored Mike and Sarah's GPS signals on a screen. The team leader frowned.
"They're moving too fast. The signals stopped in an unidentified spot within the industrial zone."
Max stood nearby, ears perked, suddenly letting out a fierce growl before bolting from the vehicle faster than anyone could stop him.
"Max, wait! Oh,
An officer shouted, but he had already vanished into the darkness. Guards encircled the industrial zone, machine guns at the ready, floodlights sweeping across every corner. But Max didn't take the main paths. With his keen sense of smell, he picked up the familiar chemical scent from Morrison, the same one that had led him to Wilson before. He slipped silently between old containers, body low to the ground, evading the lights and the sound of patrolling footsteps. A guard dog growled from a distance, But Max countered with a deep, commanding bark, his presence overwhelming enough to silence it, leaving it cowering. He found an old ventilation duct behind the warehouse, just wide enough to squeeze through. With the agility of a trained police dog, Max slipped inside, his claws lightly scraping the metal but making little noise. The duct twisted through the floors, the chemical stench growing stronger and mingling with Mike and Sarah's distant cries. Max quickened his pace, his eyes glinting brightly in the dark, until he reached a vent grill overlooking the sealed room, where Kane was torturing his friends. Back with Mike and Sarah, all efforts seemed futile at that moment. Sarah was weakening from blood loss, and Mike was coughing up blood from the relentless beating, yet both fought to stay conscious. Kane raised his gun, pressing it to Sarah's head.
Say your last words.
Just then, a loud bang reverberated as the iron door was struck, accompanied by ferocious barking. Kane spun around, stunned.
What the hell?
The door burst open and Max charged in like a whirlwind, his eyes blazing with fury. He leaped, sinking his teeth into Kane's gun hand, forcing the weapon to clatter to the floor. Kane yelped, swinging his free hand to punch Max, but the dog held firm, tightening his grip and dragging him down. Mike shouted,
Max, save Sarah!
Max whipped around, snapping Sarah's ropes in an instant with his teeth, then lunged back to pin Kane to the floor. The special forces stormed in immediately, the sound of gunfire ringing out as they subdued Kane's henchmen. Mike untied himself and rushed to hug the trembling Sarah.
Are you okay? Max is here. We're safe now.
Sarah weakly nodded, gripping Mike's hand tightly.
I knew he would come.
Max stood firm beside Kane, now motionless, his gaze resolute like a savior in the most critical moment. The special forces quickly neutralized the chemical bomb, the screen freezing at 0002. Victor Kane was handcuffed, his eyes full of hatred as he was escorted away. Mike held Sarah, helping her to her feet, his voice choked.
We did it, thanks to Max.
Sarah stroked Max's head, whispering,
You're my hero.
As dawn broke, they left the industrial complex, Max walking proudly beside them, his ears perked up. Sarah was taken to the hospital for treatment, but she smiled.
Now I can finally tell the whole story.
Mike nodded.
We took down Kane, but his organization is still standing. Anyway, today is our victory. I've learned something from all this, that nothing is stronger than trust and unity. Max taught me that loyalty can overcome any danger, and you, Sarah, showed me the meaning of never giving up.
Sarah smiled and added,
And we must remember that everyone has a responsibility to protect what's right, not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
Max lifted his head and growled lightly, as if in agreement. Mike stroked his fur.
You're the most living lesson, Max. Courage doesn't need words, only actions.
They both looked outside, where the city was waking up peacefully, a reminder that each small victory today is the foundation for preventing larger threats, and that loyalty, unity, and responsibility to society will always be the strength to protect justice. Thank you so much for following the story to the very end. If you enjoyed the loyalty and courage of Max, Mike, and Sarah in their journey to confront the criminal organization, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe for more exciting stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support is a huge motivation for us to keep telling meaningful stories. Let's spread the spirit of unity and responsibility that this trio has shown together.